Hello, friends and adventurers. Our podcast has been supported for months now by Misty Mountain Gaming, and they're now rewarding you, our listeners, with savings on all their fine D&D products such as metal dice, stone dice, glass dice, miniatures, adventures, dice trays, and more. You can use the code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, to save 10% on all purchases made in their online store at mistymountaingaming.com. Every code redeemed helps support Steven and I, and encourages us to make more and better content for you. So be sure to use code TWINS10 whenever you're buying premium Dungeons & Dragons dice and gear from our good friends at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you, players, DMs, and people that are generally interested in D&D or podcasts, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. My name is Steven. I sometimes do things, and I am joined by my twin brother, Rob.
Hi, I also occasionally do similar things. One of those things being this podcast where we talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And this week, we are going to be discussing something I'm not as familiar with as with many of the other topics that we've covered on this show.
Oh, you want to just jump right into the episode? You don't want to ask me how things are going in my life this time?
Steve, how are things going in your life this time? I know I'm normally the advocate for that.
Things are going great. I know a couple of episodes ago I talked about how my son's basketball season was getting started and how I was going to be coaching his team. You've actually been helping me with that almost every practice and almost every game, and that's going great. We are currently undefeated in our 4 games out of 8.
Yeah, I think, are you the only undefeated team in your age bracket?
Given the fact that we have beaten all the others, I would say we have to be.
I don't know exactly how many teams there are onto that group. That is great, and I understand that is in no small part to your efforts as their coach, being supportive of the kids and not treating them like athletes, but treating them like children.
You mean the other way around, or?
No, because I get to sit there while you are coaching and listen to how other members of our community are shouting at children for not playing optimally.
Gotcha. Okay, because I went into the season very intentionally, I'm going to try to treat these kids, like adults and, give them respect and not talk down to them. And I was afraid you were saying that I wasn't doing that or something, but you're just saying that I'm not yelling at them like they're my peers.
No, you're being patient. You're being understanding. You're setting reasonable expectations for their attention span and their physical abilities.
Yeah, I think that our winning streak is due to the fact that we have several players that are just naturally competitive, and the fact that some of our players dropped out and we're left with just the good ones. So that worked out in our favor, I think. How are things going with you, Rob?
Going okay. I don't remember if we talked about this on the podcast or not, but different members of the team from work have been making an effort to be a little healthier, lose a little weight. And I'm not the biggest loser on the team, or the biggest...
Oh, you'll always be the biggest loser in my book, Rob.
Gosh, thank you. That means so much to me. But I have dropped 20 pounds. I am eating much better. I am feeling much better. And I have very rarely made positive health changes in my life successfully. And I'm really encouraged by all of this lately.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, I'm proud of you for that, because I don't remember the last time that I lost any amount of weight permanently. So I'm glad to see that the needle is going in the right direction for you.
All right, but enough about us. That's not why you came here, and if it is, thank you so much. You're so sweet.
Aw, we're very touched.
But Dungeons & Dragons, so...
But Dungeons & Dragons.
This is a topic that we have wanted to cover for a long time, or more specifically, that Steve has wanted to cover for a long time, and that I have wanted Steve to cover for a long time, because this is not one of the elements of D&D that I am as comfortable or familiar with or personally experienced with as he is. And part of that is because it's not one that a dungeon master can take advantage of. And also because it's not welcome at every table.
You know, I like the fact that we kind of we bury the lead on these things. Like, oh, well, what topic could they possibly be discussing? And yet it's in the name of the episode. Like everyone saw it before they clicked on this thing. Guys, we're talking about multiclassing.
Now, before we get too far into it, just because we may be speaking to someone who hasn't played with multiclassing, we might have a listener in our audience who is unfamiliar with the term. So, Steve, would you quickly tell us what is multiclassing?
Sure thing. And if you're the person who has never heard of this concept before, well, don't worry, because multi-class is in session. Get it? Get it? It's a multi-classes joke. Anyway.
I don't even feel like groaning at that. I just want you to know that's a groaner.
Every player character in Dungeons & Dragons has class. And by that, I mean they have a class. They can be categorized into one of about, what are we up to now, 14 different groups?
Are you counting Blood Hunter?
Possibly.
Then 14.
Nailed it. Their class is going to determine what sorts of things they can do and what sort of things they are better at than others. It's going to determine whether or not they can cast spells, what sort of actions they're capable of taking in combat, what sort of armor they can wear, what sort of weapons they can wield, and what special skills they have both on and off the battlefield that are unique to them and other people who fit that class.
Right. Class is going to be, I think it's fair to say, the defining aspect of your character. Characters have different backgrounds, they might be from different races, but the most consequential decision you're going to make is this class.
And what options do multi-classing open up for us? Why, the ability to mix and match the 14 different options however we want. Imagine your class as a road. It's going to take you from point A to point B along a predetermined path. That path is straight, and you know all the stops along the way. And it's a very well-traveled path. Multiclassing would be taking the scenic route, or taking a shortcut, or simply taking an alternate route that goes by the donut shop. Each time you level up when you're multiclassing, you are given additional options. Rather than just blindly accepting the features that come next from your current class, you now select from the 13 other classes and get to ask yourself, what if I just wanted to have a little bit of this for my character?
I like the road analogy. You know, you're going the same distance. You're still going from level 1 to level 20, but the destination may change, and it might look a little bit different when you get there, and you will have seen different things and had different experiences along the way. It allows you, like you said, to dabble into another class, see a little bit how the other side lives, dip your toes into something, and really customize your character in a way that simply determining where your ability score improvements go, or what feats you take, or your subclass choice.
Maybe instead of driving, flying would be a better example. You can either fly direct, or you can take a connecting flight somewhere along the way.
Oh, let's not talk about flights.
For those who don't know, multiclassing is an optional rule in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. That doesn't just mean that you may or may not interact with it through the process of making and playing your character. It means that it may or may not be allowed at certain tables, as Rob said. And I believe, Rob, that at one point you actually said that there was no multiclassing allowed at your tables as well.
Yeah, and the reason was, to make an awkward analogy, was because I was not a confident chef at that point yet. It was very new in my dungeon mastering career, and I had a recipe book in the player's handbook and in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I wanted to follow that recipe as closely as possible. And there were these 3 little pages in the player's handbook that said, hey, and you can go off script and you can try this other thing. Other people have tried it and they've had success with it, and you might enjoy it as well. And I thought, no, I'm not prepared for that. I don't know that. I'm not comfortable with it. It looks complicated and it seems niche. So until I am comfortable with it, I didn't want anyone using it at my table, because I was trying to police the rules. I was trying to run things properly, and I wasn't confident that I could enforce something that I didn't understand. And after a couple of rereads of the material, I did not understand it to the point that I felt confident in it. And not that it was too complex, because you have managed to simplify it for folks pretty easily and succinctly, but compared to everything else that I was reading that was just completely spelled out with no guesswork, this seemed awkward and like it could get you as the player or me as the dungeon master in trouble.
Right, and not to say there's anything wrong with multiclassing, of course, and I'm sure that you felt that way even originally. It was just that you were still trying to learn how to run the game and how to help people with their player characters, because 5th edition was pretty new at the time, so you were running a system as you were learning it and teaching it as you were learning it, and you didn't want to add to all of that chaos, also having to figure out how to multiclass these new characters with these new players in a new system. Does that more or less sum it up?
That is a great way of justifying the fear that I felt on the topic of multiclassing. Let's go with your version.
Initially, you were intimidated by the concept of having multiclassed characters in your game, because you were a chef and you didn't want to complicate the recipe. You didn't want to have to improvise. So at what point did you twirl your French mustache and say, "Ho, ho, 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 I am now capable of taking on this new challenge"?
Well, it was frankly when I started playing with a group of players consistently who were experienced with the system and who had goals and dreams for their characters that were not confined to the traditional classes in Dungeons & Dragons, much less Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And I trusted them enough to handle those things, those topics that I was not as comfortable with, correctly on their own. And as they played these characters and showed them to me and showed me what they were capable of and how they worked, I, through them, learned how multiclassing worked to the extent that I know it now, and became much more comfortable with the idea. It was something I kind of had to see in action before I really got hooked.
And so now you have run some games with players who have multiclassed, and I understand that you have also multiclassed, so what are your general feelings on the matter now?
Now I'm open to it. I like the idea of multiclassing. I like the idea of having characters exactly the way you want to make them, and I see interesting roleplay reasons for doing it and opportunities in roleplay and in world building that kind of necessitate the idea of multiclassing. And it's hard to write out of your world from a narrative perspective, in my opinion. But there are pitfalls, and it is possible, as you have shown me, and we will definitely discuss, there are ways to negatively impact your character through multiclassing. It's not all positives. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. And there's also ways to, in my opinion, spoil the game that are possible only through multiclassing. And I don't mean spoil your character. I mean break D&D to the point that I doubt it's fun for anyone at the table besides the person doing it. So I still have a complicated relationship with multiclassing, and I myself very rarely do it. I can only think of one time that I have, but I welcome it at my tables and am delighted when good role players and responsible players are excited to do it. So that's my experience. What do you feel about multiclassing? And I will say my impression is that you're a fan.
Yes, I would like to go on record as saying that I feel generally positive about multiclassing as a concept. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I played a straight classed character.
You know, now that you mention it, I can't think of the last time you played a straight class character.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I discovered charisma classes and found that they all benefit heavily from a little bit of another charisma class, and there was just no going back from that for me.
And rightly so. When I think multiclassing, I typically am thinking of charisma classes or martial classes, if not something dabbling in fighter or something dabbling in barbarian.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because I do have a lot to talk about of some different combinations that I think would work out well. So, we have covered what multiclassing is. It's the process by which you take the defining aspect of your character and mix and match it with the defining aspects of other characters. So I think the first question we need to ask ourselves when we're contemplating this process is, why would you want to do it?
Well, there are two reasons, or maybe I should say there are two groups of reasons. Either for the character building and the role play, or it is for the mechanical benefit. And it can be both. in the roleplay of it, there are these different classes and there are these different pursuits. There are these different traditions and disciplines that characters in a Dungeons & Dragons world can pursue. And just as there is a reason for you to take your first level in Wizard, there is a reason for a character to take their first level in Sorcerer or Rogue. And over the course of a D&D character's life, they may find reasons to pursue other skill sets, and their life might make those choices easier or more difficult. And that will help create the wholly unique player character that you have chosen to portray and chosen to tell their story. This is a wonderful reason to choose to multiclass. I often feel that it is maybe the overlooked of the pair, because the other reason, the mechanical benefits, can just make such a strong argument for multiclassing at times.
Well, on the narrative side of things, D&D is intended to reflect real life in a lot of ways, right? And I know that sometimes gets lost in the fantasy of it all, but to a degree, all role-playing games are to mirror real life with the addition of some other fantastic element, right? But just like in real life, where we are affected by our experiences, so too can your D&D character be. And that doesn't just mean that, because their parents died when they were young, they decided to become a rogue. It can also mean that as they went out and adventured, they traveled with martially skilled characters and wanted to learn some of those moves, some of those abilities for themselves. It could mean that they made a pact with a fey creature and requested some of its aid and its powers in exchange for service. Or it could mean that you and your dungeon master decided that some latent magical abilities began to manifest, or were granted as a reward by some sort of powerful entity. All of these being reasons that your character, who was previously a paladin, might take pause and begin training as a fighter, or a warlock, or a sorcerer.
I like your comparison. And for the listeners, we don't always discuss what we're going to say before the episodes go.
Yeah, then we'd have to talk to each other twice in the same day. And I don't get paid enough for that.
But I think it's a valid point that RPGs like D&D are meant to mirror real life. And in real life, I have had many vocations. I have pursued many different disciplines over the course of my life. I have learned how to be a pest control worker. I've learned how to be a bartender and a manager, and I have studied D&D for years. If you think of your character's life as having led them to acquire different skill sets over the course of time, multiclassing starts to make a lot of sense.
And actually, that's the reason that I took my very first multiclass. However, since then, I have fallen to the allure of the more popular reason to multiclass, which is the mechanical benefit. Let's face it, D&D is a role-playing game, but it is still a game. And whenever you play a game, it is possible to win. And personally, I feel like multiclassing makes it easier to win.
It's a cooperative game, not a competitive game, but it's very Animal Farm, right? It's like all player characters are equal, but some are more equal than others.
I know that that's a really bad analogy, but let's just say that if there is a particular thing that you want your character to be exceptionally good at, which I know is a concept that really appeals to Rob, which is crazy that this hasn't come up before, but if you have decided, I want my character to be the fastest thing alive, or if you decide, I want my character to be an expert every skill in the game, or I want my character to be literally incapable of rolling a natural one, or I want my character to be able to take down a pit fiend in a single turn. Those things are nigh impossible to achieve as a single class, but they are very possible if you combine the features of multiple classes, picking and choosing the ones that serve that purpose and enable you to do that one thing better than anyone else. So if you made your character with the thought in mind that you were going to accomplish a certain goal, multiclassing can just let you do that better and or faster than you would otherwise be able to as a single classed character.
So you may ask yourself then, why doesn't everybody multiclass? If there's so many great reasons to do so, so many compelling roleplay reasons and mechanical benefits, why is everyone not doing this?
Because their DM is scared.
I mean, that's my reason, but why don't we go into a little bit of why this might not be such a great idea for your character.
Multiclassing isn't all sunshine and roses. There are plenty of upsides to doing it, both narratively and mechanically. You get additional customization options, better build diversity, the opportunity to experiment with a bunch of different powerful synergies, but there are drawbacks too. The most notable one is if you take your total possible 20 levels within the game of Dungeons & Dragons, and you start mixing and matching those class levels, it follows that while there are going to be some things that you additionally gain access to, there are also going to be some things you miss out on. Say you have a 20th level character, and you took 15 levels in Paladin and 5 levels in Fighter. That's all well and good. You're still a 20th level character. There are going to be some things that you are just stupid good at, but you are not going to be a 20th level Paladin. Meaning that all of the Paladin features that you would get from level 16 to 20 are forever closed to you.
This is actually not a problem in 5th edition for a lot of classes. 5th edition gets a lot of criticism for class features coming in at its highest levels being a little lackluster. In fact, since you get access to highest level spell slots for full class casters a few levels before, it's almost as though the game is begging you to dip a few levels into a different class. But for the classes that do have those appealing capstones, it may not be fun to kiss them goodbye.
Yeah, and that's kind of a known thing that, classes are really front-loaded in terms of all the things that you get at early levels versus how few things you get at later levels. And honestly, I agree. A lot of the 20th level features that you get are kind of disappointing. So taking one level out of your main class to get some sort of benefit early on whenever you want it, and all you're trading is a kind of a disappointing 20th level feature for that doesn't sound too bad, especially since most campaigns don't go to 20th level. So, you know what? I think that right now might be a good time to talk about the first thing that I do when I consider multiclassing. Any guess as to what that is, Rob?
Check the primary ability score?
Nope. I talk to my dungeon master, and the question that I ask him is this: what level do you expect this campaign to take us to, realistically? Because if this campaign is only going to take me to 10th level, if I'm considering a multiclass, I know that I'm working with combinations of classes and levels 10 and below. I don't have to factor into my decision-making process anything that any class would get at 11th level or higher. If the DM tells me that the campaign is going to go all the way to level 20, then I have to take a lot more into consideration than if he tells me it's going to stop at around level 5 or level 7.
Or potentially just play your character and make decisions as you level up. Weird, I know.
That just hurt my brain and my heart a little bit when you said that.
I know. You are a player and gamer. You are a builder. You are a strategist. So I know that having a plan for future levels is a big part of character creation for you. You want to know what they're going to be good at as much as you want to know what they're good at now.
Right. I want to know if they're going to be able to achieve the combination of abilities that I had in mind within the bounds of the campaign. I want to know how quickly I'm going to be able to do that and how long I'm going to be able to keep that for. So, for instance, if I have a multi-class combination in mind that doesn't really come together until 9th level, and the Dungeon Master tells me that the campaign's probably going to end around 10th level, I might go for something else, because I will be playing that character for many, 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 many levels, waiting to finally achieve the result that I'm looking for, to fully flesh out that character concept that I've had in my mind this whole time, and then the campaign is going to end right after that, right when I finally hit my stride. That just doesn't feel like a good time for me. So I'd probably rather select a multi-class combination that comes online, so to speak, a little bit earlier so I can enjoy it a little longer. But the reason I say all that is to say, when you're determining whether or not to multi-class, the duration of the campaign should always be a factor, because it tells you what sort of things you're going to miss out on due to a level cap, and what sort of things you're going to miss out on due to a potential multi-class. And then you can make an informed decision about where to go, or even if to go.
Yes, and having that plan for a character is fairly important, because you don't want to wind up with a character who rolled with the punches and wound up in a situation where they have multiple levels in non-complementary classes. This is one of the few ways that you can, I don't want to say ruin a D&D character, but spoil their opportunity to be able to keep up with the rest of the party. There are ways that you can multiclass that get a character far and away ahead in terms of ability and damage output than the rest of the party, and there are ways to fall behind. Classic internet examples of this are characters like Absurd from Puffin Forest, or Patrick Rothfuss's C-Team Acquisitions Incorporated character Drabus Beestinger, who is a basically perennial college dropout who keeps taking classes and courses and doing a semester in Wizard and a semester in Bard, and just winds up being a non-functional, messy puddle of a D&D character, unfortunately. Very fun to roleplay, very entertaining to watch, but criminally ineffective when the chips are down. So it's certainly good to go in with, if not a plan of exactly what you are going to do, have a plan of what you're not going to do.
Well, I think it is fair to say that you can kind of ruin a character by multiclassing if you do so poorly. One of the things that we mentioned going into this episode is that the classes in Dungeons & Dragons are fairly well designed. If you take a single class and you play them from level 1 to 20, you will have a good time. The abilities that it has are meant to complement one another, synergize with itself, and as long as you have increased the primary stat or stats of that class to a respectable degree, they will function and they will be effective. If you multiclass, you can make them additionally effective, or you can make them entirely ineffective based on the decisions that you make and when you make them. I think that the stuff we were talking about before is a fairly common consideration. Players will often look at their different multiclassing options and see, if I take this many levels of this secondary class, that means I will never achieve this level of my primary class. I feel like that's pretty often considered. What I don't think is often considered is the fact that multiclassing is often an investment. That first level or two that you take outside of your main class may put you a bit behind some of the other members of your party.
Right, as you said, the different classes of D&D are pretty front-loaded with tasty little treats and abilities that you have access to. If a fighter derails immediately and takes a level in Rogue from level 1 to level 2, they're missing out on their second wind and their action surge, which other members of the party are getting cool second-level features, and they're contenting themselves with the entry-level fighter and the entry-level rogue instead of progressing to cooler features. Much less if you're doing this for a martial class that gets access to an extra attack at 5th level. One of your classes will have to reach 5th level for you to get access to that, and anything you do to delay that is going to put you behind the rest of the party in terms of damage.
And we could just give a bunch of examples of when the wrong time is to multiclass. But suffice to say that if you and the rest of your party are preparing to get a significant power increase, like the one that comes at level 3, when most classes get their subclass features, or the one that comes at level 4 when you get your first ability score increase, the one that comes at level 5 when everyone unlocks their 3rd level spell slots and extra attacks. If you decide that you multiclass when everyone else is gaining such a significant power boost, you're probably going to feel bad. You're probably going to fall behind. And eventually it'll pay off, but considering how long you're going to be, how far behind the party, I think is very rarely a consideration when people are looking into multiclassing. But personally, I think that taking the time to look at that can save you a lot of grief along the way and really change your opinion about the process in general.
Right, when your party members are casting Fireball and you're still stuck on Burning Hands, that's a case of the feel-bads.
That happened to me. That was a sore spot for a while.
And I will say, these are reasons why you may not want to multiclass as a player. If you are on the Dungeon Master's side of the screen, a reason that you might want to keep multiclassing far away from your table is in terms of encounter balance. There are ways, as we've just been speaking of, that it is possible for a certain character that has multiclassed to not be able to pull their weight. And in order to challenge the rest of the party in an encounter, you may risk killing that character in an encounter that wasn't designed to be quite so deadly. Or, conversely, There are many people out there on the internet that have optimized builds, taken particular feats and multi-class options and spells and subclass features and have cobbled them together into these incredibly powerful Frankensteins of player characters that are capable of one-shotting the hardest enemies in the game. And if you have one such player at your table, it is going to be impossible to entertain the rest of the characters in a combat and challenge and entertain this superhero at the same time. But these concerns, these considerations that we are presenting you with, we are not trying to dissuade you from using multiclassing. We're just trying to make you aware of some potential pitfalls and dangers that come with this optional rule. Again, Steve and I are generally in favor of it, and there are things to enjoy in the game that are only accessible using this rule. So, if we haven't scared you off yet, and you are still interested in multiclassing, and I hope you are, let's talk a little bit about what your character needs to get started down this road.
As usual, the first thing that your character needs is class. Well, every character is going to have class, of course, because every character starts at level 1 having already selected a class. But I think that's a very important place to begin. Multiclassing considerations don't begin when you take your first level in your second class. They start at level 1 just like everything else. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because of your starting proficiencies. As we go through the multiclassing process, you're going to get to steal a lot of skills and features and proficiencies from the class that you go into, your secondary class, the one you leave your primary class for. However, the majority of your skill proficiencies, your armor proficiencies, your weapon proficiencies, and most importantly, your saving throw proficiencies are going to be gained from your primary class. Those saving throw proficiencies are extremely rare and incredibly unlikely to change without a lot of intent and work and planning on your part as your character levels up. And the opportunity to increase the number of saving throw proficiencies that you have probably won't come for several levels. So it is important to start as the class that gets you the saving throw proficiencies and the armor proficiencies that you want. After you start multiclassing, you're going to get a slew of benefits from your secondary class, but not all of the ones that you would get if that was your primary class. So which class you take first is very important. When I know from the get-go that I am going to be multiclassing a character, I always start as the class that is going to give me the saving throw and armor proficiencies that I want. You know, there are feats and things that will get you additional armor training, additional weapon proficiencies. There's even the resilient feat, which gives you saving throw proficiencies. But as much as I love feats, I would probably rather be spending those on something else, at least initially.
Yeah, because you love feats. You want to get some of those tasty ones.
Right. So I want to go ahead and lock down the proficiencies that I consider integral to my character concept right out the gate. And so I make sure that my primary class, the one that I take at level 1, gives me those things.
And once you have taken that first level dip into another class, it's business as usual. Your second level in Rogue is just like everyone else's second level in Rogue. It is only the first level dip that you take into another class where you don't get everything that class would normally be entitled to. So, especially if you're starting from level 1, which class you select as your primary is quite a significant decision.
Man, I hope we're not too all over the place in this episode because I can tell I'm jumping around a lot. Here at we're probably at 30, 45 minutes by now. Let's talk about how one multiclasses. We have made the decision. We are going to take a secondary class and deviate away from our primary class. We have chosen our primary class and gained the proficiencies, hit die, and features that are associated with it. We've taken a few levels and we've decided that, yes, now is the time that we break away and begin taking levels in our secondary class. How does that work? Rob, help me walk through the process.
All right. Just to be thorough, and this may seem obvious, you have this opportunity when your character gains a level, whether your dungeon master thinks you're at an appropriate point in the story, or whether you have gained enough XP to level up your character. At that point, instead of taking an additional level in your same class, you can begin anew. And when you make that choice, you then have to decide which class you are going to be diving into. And your specific character probably can't choose between all of them, because each class does have a prerequisite that must be met before you can transition into it, if it was not your primary class. This is typically tied to the new class's primary ability score, the thing that they are going to use for most of their class features and their iconic actions. For example, a rogue's is dexterity, a barbarian's is strength, and a wizard's is intelligence. Kinda no-brainers there.
So when you're looking at those primary ability scores, when you're going to multi-class, in order to be eligible to do so, you have to meet the multi-classing prerequisites for both classes, both the one that you took at level 1, your primary class, and the secondary class that you're moving into. Now, what's weird is that you don't have to meet any prerequisites to take that class at level 1. You could have a negative to your intelligence modifier, and you would still be allowed to be a wizard at level 1, but when that wizard tries to multi-class into rogue, suddenly his intelligence score matters. That's not, really immersive, but it is an important consideration.
I just want to say, I found that confusing, the thing that you just said. So basically, if you're multi-classing, and only if you are multi-classing, you need to meet the prerequisite for both classes before you can take advantage of multi-classing.
Bingo.
Weird.
And an additional consideration is that some classes have more than one primary ability score. This applies where you have what some people call half-casters, which are paladins and rangers, and also monks. They get to do magical and martial things, so they need both a mental ability score and a physical ability score prerequisite. Monks have dexterity and wisdom, rangers also have dexterity and wisdom, and paladins have strength and charisma. So you can have up to 4 stat requirements that you have to take into account and meet in order to do certain multi-class combinations. Usually it'll be 2, but it can certainly be more.
Most D&D characters are going to casually meet these requirements. It's not difficult to have a character who is going to be good at more than one ability score and have numbers that high. In fact, because some of these are complementary and shared across multiple classes, it makes certain multi-class pairings very simple, easy, and therefore attractive.
If you're curious as to what the different prerequisites are, they can be found on page 163 of the Player's Handbook, or basically anywhere with a quick Google search. Notably, the prerequisite is always a score of 13 in the requisite ability. So, once we have determined which class we want to go into and proved our eligibility by meeting the prerequisites, the level up process begins to get a bit more familiar with a couple of changes. Anytime you level up, you get an additional hit die. That's standard. What's different with multiclassing is that if you multiclass into a secondary class that has a different hit die than that of your primary class, you now have 2 different types of hit die that you have to track separately.
I just realized how tired I'm going to be of hearing the word class.
Oh yeah, I can feel it. I can feel it.
I'm just going to deal with that. Carry on.
For instance, a barbarian has a D12 hit die and a fighter has a D10. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, I got it right. I know D&D. I do a podcast. I deserve to be here sometimes. If you were a level 5 barbarian that just took your first level in fighter, you would have 5 D12 hit die and 1 D10 hit die, and you would track and spend those separately.
Right, so this probably means that you're going to have less health than the average level 6 barbarian, and it means that you are going to have to do a little bit more bookkeeping and let the dungeon master know which hit die you are spending when you're taking a short rest and trying to get a few hit points back.
And this is a good point to say that the big intimidating factor for me as a new player who wanted to start multiclassing was all the bookkeeping. The fact that you have to track all of this stuff from multiple classes on the same character sheet, it just gets crowded and complicated, and I really just didn't want to mess with it with my first character. By the time my second character rolled around, I was ready to try it, and it did get a little bit complicated. By the time I was ready to make my third character, D&D Beyond was a thing. And boy, D&D Beyond makes multiclassing a snap. For any of you who are intimidated by any of the bookkeeping that we are talking about, just use D&D Beyond, guys.
Yep, feel free to sponsor us, D&D Beyond. We will take it.
Give me your books for free.
But yeah, that is a good point. And specifically when it comes to spell casting, I found multiclassing very intimidating because there's a whole different table that's not in the same place of the book, which I was using a book at the time. It's in a completely different chapter that you would have to reference and get away from everything that you were already having to look up at the table. It just seemed like a bunch of extra work. And then you had to keep track of this class feature and that class feature. Instead of adding more opportunities to use Bardic Inspiration, I was going to have to keep track of Bardic Inspiration and Metamagic at points. And it just seemed like a hassle, a beneficial hassle. But there were days, and they are still here, that I come to D&D to relax and to unwind and to enjoy myself, not wish I had an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of what my character can do.
Speaking of things that you need a table for, that's what the next step is. We had to consult a table when we determined our prerequisites, and that was to figure out whether or not we could multiclass. But now that we know that we can multiclass, we get to check the table on page 164 of the player's handbook, which is gained proficiencies. Some classes are better at things than others. I think that goes without saying. No one expects a wizard to be running around in armor, but it also seems crazy for a fighter to not wear armor. So when that wizard decides to take a couple of fighter levels, he is also going to get armor proficiencies along with it, as well as the ability to use shields and martial weapons. There's a lot of different combinations that are available on this chart. You'll have to check them out for your specific multi-class combo to see what you gain from doing so. But suffice to say that most classes are proficient in light armor, medium armor, simple weapons, or martial weapons. And depending on what your secondary class is, you will probably be adding some of those to your list if you don't already have them.
Multiclassing into Sorcerer and Wizard, very easy. You get nothing.
It's not that you get nothing.
You get nothing, Steve.
There's nothing on this table.
You get no bonus proficiencies. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You do get spellcasting, which we already mentioned that gets a little bit complicated. Sorcerer's and Wizard get spellcasting, which we're going to cover spellcasting in a minute because I need to take a deep breath and a stiff drink before we get into that.
Steve is going to cover spellcasting. I'm going to sit here and nod.
Let's do the next easy thing. Hey, you know how classes get special class features when they level up? This is uncomplicated. When you become a first level rogue, or a first level fighter, or a first level cleric, you get the class features that are associated with being a member of that class at that level. This part is completely uncomplicated. If you are a level 5 ranger, level 1 druid, you get all the features of a level 5 ranger and all the features of a level 1 druid. This is only complicated by very specific features which appear in multiple class lists and do not duplicate themselves.
Right. So the barbarian and the monk both have a version of a class feature called Unarmored Defense. If you are multiclassing between a barbarian and a monk, you may use either class's version of Unarmored Defense, but not both simultaneously.
Similarly, a ton of classes get access to the extra attack feature, and it basically works the same for all of them. If you were to, say, take 5 levels of fighter and 5 levels of paladin, you would encounter the extra attack feature twice, once for each of them. The extra attack feature doesn't stack, sadly. Having the same feature unlocked 2 different times just means that you have unlocked the same feature 2 times. It doesn't mean that you get to take advantage of that feature twice.
Right, that's kind of a reward for being a high-level fighter, say, who gets extra attack 2 and extra attack 3 as they level up, and differentiates itself from other classes' versions of that ability. The only other one really worth talking about is the Cleric and Paladin's shared Channel Divinity feature. When you unlock these features, you can use your use of Channel Divinity to power either the Cleric or the Paladin's Channel Divinity effects. And as you unlock extra uses of the Channel Divinity feature, you may use them to power either class's version of the effect, but you cannot add uses that you gained by taking levels in Cleric two uses you gained by taking levels in Paladin. They are versatile, they are not additive.
And that was a lot of words, but not nearly as many words as I'm going to have to spend on this next section. Because there is one more feature that a lot of classes get to unlock that has the same name. That being the spellcasting feature.
The section explaining how to use spellcasting as a multi-class player character was so dense, so wordy, so unlike any other section of the player's handbook that it turned me off of the idea. This was what made me not want to multi-class or to allow it in my game initially. And frankly, I'm still not confident that I can do it correctly unassisted, so I'm just going to let you take this one.
All right, I have stepped away, I have had a beer, I am ready to talk about this. Multiple classes have the spellcasting feature, and whenever you multi-class with a class that does have access to it, you have to take the multi-classing rules for spellcasting into account. When determining your spells known or spells prepared, you do that as each of the classes that comprise your character separately. So let's say you're a 3rd level cleric who gets to prepare their spells and a 2nd level ranger. You will not prepare your cleric spells as a 5th level cleric or as a 5th level ranger. You will do so as a 3rd level cleric and then stop, switch over into ranger mode, and prepare them as a 2nd level ranger. You will gain access to all of those spells known, all of those spells prepared, but you will do so as each class separately. Hopefully that made sense.
You're covering a confusing topic, and you're doing better than I would do.
And when you cast these spells, you will cast them each using the primary spellcasting ability score of that class. So while a cleric and a ranger both cast with their wisdom, if you were for some reason a wizard and a cleric, you would cast your wizard spells with your intelligence score and your cleric spells with your wisdom score. In addition to that, many classes have different spellcasting focuses. For instance, wizards have crystal balls, wands, staffs, things like that, and clerics have holy symbols. If you wanted to cast a cleric spell, you would need to have a holy symbol on hand, whereas if you wanted to cast a wizard spell, you would need to have a wand on hand. Those do not cross-pollinate. The rules do not change just because you happen to take levels in a different class. So that part does get a little bit finicky. But if it helps, there is an upside, one thing that does not get more complicated when you're multiclassing, and that is your cantrips. Cantrips are special in a couple of ways because, of course, for one, you don't have to expend any spell slots to cast them. But in a second way, they are also special because they increase in power not based on the level of the spell slot used to cast them, but based on your character's level. Please note that I said character's level, not class level. A multi-class character's cantrips will still scale based on their total character level, which is all the different classes added together. So our level 3 cleric, level 2 ranger would cast their cantrips as a 5th level character. It is completely unaffected by your choice to multi-class. And in fact, that can actually have a pretty big payoff later on, but that's kind of, that we'll cover that later.
You're doing great, kid. Just wanted to say that. I'm going to keep sipping this coffee.
Now for the complicated part, determining how many spell slots you have. This is done by math, and lots of it. I am going to tell you how to do this in just a second, but before I do, let me just go ahead and say, just do it on D&D Beyond. They do all this math for you. You can forget everything that I'm about to say and fast forward the episode by about a minute and never have to worry about what that minute contained. But for those of you who have decided to play on pen and paper,
the good old-fashioned way.
First off, I'm sorry. Second off, here we go. To determine the number of spell slots that you have, you add together your levels in Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, and Wizard classes. Those are the full casters, as I'll refer to them from now on, and add them along with half your levels of the half casters, which is Paladins and Rangers, rounded down, or a third of your levels in the Fighter or Rogue classes if you opted to take the Eldritch Knight or Arcane Trickster subclasses. Adding all the levels in the full casters, adding half your levels in the half casters, and a third of all your levels in those two specific subclasses, we get a number. And we take that number and we use it to consult a table on page 165 of the player's handbook called the Multiclass Spellcaster Table. We take that number as our level, and see how many spell slots we get. Notably, the multi-class spellcaster table follows the same progression that a full caster would get. The penalty comes in the form of the level deductions that you get as the half-casters or those two subclasses. Essentially meaning that if you divert away from full caster classes into half-casters or non-casters, you will not gain spell slots as quickly. One final consideration is that if you have more than one spellcasting class, the table might give you access to spell slots of a level higher than the spells that you can know or prepare based on the multi-class combination that currently exists. If that does happen, you can use those spell slots that you do have access to upcast your lower level spells that you do know or have prepared, which often has benefits like dealing more damage or being able to make an effect last longer or apply to additional targets. And of course, that spell slot will be ready and waiting for you when you do unlock spells of that level. And I'm hoping that everyone fast forwarded to this point and we can just move forward from there.
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. I know that was a lot of you tanking stuff that I wasn't comfortable dealing with, so I've got this next one for you. Let's talk about what if you wanted to multi-class into a warlock. They also cast spells. Well, that's the easy part, and that's the delightful part. Pact magic and spellcasting are technically different class features, so you simply have access to whatever spellcasting spell slots and spells from your spellcasting class, and whatever spells and cantrips you would have from your Pact magic feature. No muss, no fuss, no calculations, just exactly what it says on the tin.
Which is one of the reasons that I multiclass into Warlock most often, out of all the different spellcasting options.
It is just easier.
Unlike most of the things that we talk about when we contemplate multiclassing, it is purely additive. You get your spellcasting feature spells and your Pact Magic feature spells, all compiled completely separately, nice and clean.
It's nice when 1 + 1 = 2, isn't it?
It is. Okay. Well, with that spellcasting consideration out of the way,
it's all downhill from here.
We've covered why you might want to multiclass, what risks you run when you multiclass, and the step-by-step process that you undergo when you actually take this level from your primary class into the secondary one. Now, because we've discussed that there are potential pitfalls when we go through this process, I think it bears just a few minutes of conversation about how to do it correctly, how to make sure that you don't accidentally handicap your character, or how to minimize the amount of time that they are behind the rest of the party as you work to realize your vision for the character. The option to multiclass can happen at every single level up that you get between 1 and 20. The main way to mitigate the pain and frustration that is possible when undertaking this process is to choose the right point at which to begin multiclassing and how far to take it. When I plan out my multiclasses, after, of course, asking the Dungeon Master how far they see this campaign taking us, my next step is to look at the combinations available to me based on my character concept and find the feature that I am most excited to unlock in the classes that I'm considering. Maybe it's the fighter's third attack at 11th level, or maybe it's their second use of action surge at 17th level. If I'm playing a bard, maybe I'm excited about the font of inspiration at 6th level, or maybe it's the 9th level magical secrets at 18th. The level where that class or subclass is going to gain their best feature, in my opinion, will vary a little bit from one to the next. And which one you are most excited about is going to vary wildly from person to person. But there are some common cutoff points to look out for. Most classes are going to unlock some class-defining features and subclass choices at 3rd level. Most classes are going to unlock 3rd level spells and or extra attacks at 5th level. 11th and 15th levels are also very important because they unlock 6th level spells as well as powerful class and subclass features. And 17th level is when spellcasters gain access to 9th level spells. In addition to those, any level where a class gains an ability score feature or a feat could also be a turning point for you. After you look at all of those different options, it is up to you to decide which level is going to be non-negotiable for you. The one that contains that feature you're most excited about that you must get to. Now, subtract that level from 20, which is the highest level you can achieve, or the level at which your DM says that they expect the campaign to end, and that gives you the number of quote-unquote free levels that are available to multiclass with.
So you're basically defining a budget for how far into another class or classes could I go.
That is exactly the concept. You figure out how many levels you have to work with, how many are non-negotiable, and then how many you get to play with, or at least that's how I look at it. Now, take a look at those quote-unquote free levels, the multi-class available levels, and see what you have to gain by multiclassing. Just because you have, say, 5 available free levels doesn't mean that you should spend them all on a multiclass. While there are certainly some notable exceptions, most of these secondary classes that you might swap into are going to be gaining their iconic features at relatively early levels. Some of them gain their coolest stuff at level 1. So if you have more than that many free levels, you should kind of evaluate whether or not you should spend those on your secondary class, or just go back and take a couple more levels in your primary class. Or if you're a really crazy person like me, maybe even spend them on a second multi-class.
Right. So unlocking spells and spell casting happens as early as first level for a sorcerer or for a wizard. Bards and rogues unlock skill proficiency bonuses in Jack of all trades and expertise quite early on. And if you're already dipped 2 levels into one of these classes, why not go a third and grab that iconic subclass feature unlocked at 3rd level for so many different classes, which usually comes with a pretty good haul of different features and abilities that you can now make use of.
Right. Let's take, say, Fighter as an example. By just taking a single level in Fighter, you unlock proficiency in medium armor, you unlock proficiency with shields, and you unlock proficiency with every weapon in the game. In addition to that, you get the second wind feature, so you get a ton of stuff by taking just a single level out of your primary class into Fighter. If you decide that it's worth it to go a second level, you get Action Surge, which is one of the most busted abilities in the game and allows you to take an additional action on your turn every once in a while. If you decide you can spare 3 levels into Fighter, you get a Martial Archetype, which is the Fighter subclass that's going to unlock a lot of new features for you based on the decision that you make. And if you decide you can spare 4, you're going to get an ability score improvement and or a feat. If you decide you can spare 5, you get extra attack, and it just keeps going from there. Now, you might decide that your character really needs that extra attack and there's no point going into Fighter unless you get all 5 levels. Or you might decide that your character really just needs the Action Surge so he can stop with only 2. And then those other 3 levels might be better spent on your primary class, because as cool as an extra attack would be, you're going to get something better by sticking with what you started with.
Okay, that is enough facts and figures. As you can tell, this is not one of the more simple subjects necessarily in Dungeons & Dragons, and it's one of the reasons why I delayed in us covering this topic, is because there were things that I felt more confident on and comfortable with and that were easier to discuss.
I feel like this was a really important topic to cover, but I am realizing there's a lot of hurdles in coming up with examples. Good examples require a different combination every time. So I apologize if it's hard to follow along in an audio medium. I hope that you guys are understanding how to take advantage of the benefits and how to avoid some of the pitfalls over this medium. And I hope you're feeling a little bit of my enthusiasm for it and hopefully catching the bug.
To end on a positive note, because again, we do feel good about multiclassing and think you should do it, let's quickly cover some of our favorite multiclassing combinations, even though you can multiclass anything with anything if you are determined enough or crazy enough. But there are some synergies that are just oh so sweet. So Steve, what is some of your favorite pairings for multiclassing?
Let me start by saying that I think that there are some classes that are just so good that anyone should consider them. At every level up, regardless of your class, if you meet the prerequisites, taking 1 or 2 levels of Fighter will completely change your character's combat effectiveness. Adding in the ability to use most armors, all weapons, gaining a fighting style, and gaining second wind and action surge is just insanely good. There's no class in the game that wouldn't benefit from those things. Now, the degree to which they would benefit from them is, of course, different, but it's always a consideration with any character that I play. Also, a single level of Cleric will give you access to most armors and weapons in the game, and the ability to be a prepared spellcaster with access to some of the best buff spells in the game, like Guidance and Bless. In addition, clerics get to pick their subclass at level 1, and some subclasses come with heavy armor proficiency, which is crazy. And if you really feel like your character's skills just aren't represented well enough, a single level of Rogue is going to allow you to get Expertise, which doubles your proficiency bonus in 2 skills of your choice, which I like to think of as sneaky good. Finally, any caster in the game could benefit to admittedly varying degrees by taking a single level in Warlock, because Pact Magic is additive, meaning that you're going to get 2 extra first level spells that come back on short rests. While I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for all the clerics and wizards out there are some builds that rely heavily on those first level slots and could benefit heavily from it.
Also, access to Eldritch Blast is never bad.
Right, because Eldritch Blast is a cantrip. You can cast it as much as you want, and its power scales with your character level, meaning there's really no downside to picking it up. It is one of the best cantrips in the game. Bardic Twinspiration ranked it 3rd, but I think most people would probably rank it higher.
Some other multi-classes that just make good sense for particular builds that have very much excited the internet, and if you have missed them, you really are new to multi-classing. Thank you for tuning in. Are pairing druids with barbarians, because barbarians have the opportunity to rage, which effectively doubles their hit points against most damage types, and druids have the ability to wild shape and give themselves an extra pool of hit points on top of their normal character's health, which is just a winning combination for basically never allowing your character to die.
Yeah, what could you possibly have to say against both having more health and taking less damage at the same time?
A combination that I know Steve holds near and dear to his heart is that of the Paladin and the Hexblade Warlock. Whereas Paladins get to stomp around in heavy armor and wield any weapon that they want, along with the ability to put some divine emphasis on their damage when they strike with a weapon, Hexblades get to wield their weapon of choice with their charisma modifier instead of the often overlooked strength modifier that has very little potential for roleplay or skills outside of its use at swinging heavy weapons. So a paladin who can dump their strength score and just emphasize that single all-important charisma ability score is going to be terribly effective.
I could legitimately do a whole episode on why every charisma caster should take a dip into Hexblade Warlock, but all of what Rob has said is exactly true. In addition, paladins in particular benefit from taking a level in Hexblade because they get extra spell slots to smite with that come back on a short rest. They gain access to the shield spell as a class feature of the Hexblade Warlock. You gain access to the Eldritch Blast cantrip, which has a range of 120 feet and helps overcome the Paladin's primary weakness, which is mostly fighting in melee. And you get a fun little bonus action curse that applies various effects to your enemies, most notably of which for paladins is that it doubles your crit range, meaning you crit on 19s and 20s, which paladins, out of all the classes in the game, with the possible exception of rogues, can capitalize the most on.
Whether one of these particular combinations has sparked your creative spirit, or if you're excited by doing something a little less known, a little less traditional, and a little more unique to you, multiclassing is a wonderful way to distinguish yourself from the throngs of other Dungeons & Dragons player characters out there, and make yourself just a little bit more artisan, a little bit more bespoke.
Multiclassing is one of my favorite aspects of the game. It's a dynamic process that emphasizes your creative freedom as a player within the system, giving you endless possibilities at every turn and allowing you, as Rob said, to make something uniquely your own. Regardless of whether you undertake multiclassing to enhance your character's combat effectiveness, to improve their reliability in performing certain tasks, or just to have the words and numbers on your sheet more accurately represent the concept that you have in your head, all of those pursuits are going to be best achieved through the use of the multiclassing optional rule. So, did you come into this episode never having attempted multiclassing before? Are you now intimidated or excited about the prospect? If you have a lot of experience with multiclassing, how has that experience gone? What are some great combinations that you've found, and what were you able to achieve by doing them?
Whatever your opinions and feelings, please share them with us. We'd love to know them and have them color our own impressions of this thing that once very much unashamedly terrified me. You can reach out to us at our community Discord, which is linked in the description of this episode, wherever you may find it, or by looking for Twinspiration or Bardic Twinspiration on social media.
If you want to hear more of mine and Rob's opinions on this and other topics, check out Misty Mountain Gaming's Dungeon Feed. I actually just submitted an article on multiclassing about a week or two ago. It should be out by the time this episode gets released. If you're looking for my opinions on this topic that are a little bit more distilled, a little bit more methodical, you should go and check it out. We'll put a link to that article in the description of this episode.
And hey, thanks for listening to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. We'll be back to fill your ear holes with more D&D trivia very soon. See you next time. If you enjoyed this episode and wish to hear more like it, please consider supporting us on Patreon or on Anchor.fm. You can also support us by using code TWINS10. That's TWINS10 whenever buying dice or other premium Dungeons & Dragons products from MistyMountainGaming.com. Or just by sharing us with your friends. If you'd like to join the conversation, please join our community Discord or reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Links to all of that below the episode. And hey, in case you don't hear it anywhere else this week, we love you guys. Till next time. I'll admit, when you said ladder, I was like, he's got to have something good for this, because I don't know where he's going.
This is the problem with not planning ahead. Paladin, sorcerers, bards, and the other one.
Warlocks.
Warlocks, yes, of course.
You maybe comment on that, and then we pivot to, this is if it's handled poorly, and these are niche cases, but they're things that we didn't want to ignore as we were addressing the topic. Let's talk about some specific examples of benefits.
Go ahead and say that in your podcast voice.
My podcast voice. You're right, though.
We both have them.
Yeah. So at level 1, it doesn't matter what your ability scores are at all to take any particular class. But if you were using the optional multiclassing rule, you could not multiclass unless you met the prerequisites for your own class?
Correct.
That's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on.
You may say so.
This is going in the bloopers. It will.
Okay.
I will.
Bingo.
Weird.
That was the best snap I've ever done in my life.
I'm happy for you. Just well done. Just ticker tape. Confetti.
Gonna bask. It might be because of the sound conditioning in the room, but it sounded hot.
Do you need to check if your family members are awake now? Like that might have shaken the house?
No, I'm good.